Welcome back to Frontier Mysteries. Today we're talking about work in the Old West. When you think of work on the frontier, what do you think of? A cowhand? A sheriff? A bartender? All of these were real jobs, but there were many, many more career paths you could take during these times, some of which were odd or obsolete, looking back. In this video, we wanted to look at 33 frontier jobs that are just plain odd. At best, some of these jobs are just a little strange. At worst, they're completely useless, and you might wonder after learning about them what possessed a town to have some of these positions. But we'll look not only at the job and how it works, but also how it might have benefited the town. As usual, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications. Let's dive into our first job that is still seen in some circles today. Snake oil salesman. Let's begin with a job you've probably heard about. When someone promotes a bogus cure, they're called a snake oil salesman. This term is based on real folks who would come to town and tell people who had ailments that they had the cure. Sometimes it would be literal snake oil. Other times it would be an herbal blend that was ineffective, if not dangerous. Some people died because of these snake oil salesmen, and remember, this was back in the Wild West, so you couldn't put together a class action lawsuit. At best, you might be able to shoot the guy for selling you some bogus stuff. By the time people found out, they'd be on to the next town, often with a different name or scam to be shown. New scams would show up, and some people, if they were gullible enough, would fall for another snake oil product. In a way, this career never died out, with bogus cures still being promoted today through books, late-night TV ads, and of course, YouTube videos. If you see something that makes you think, snake oil salesman, you better run. Town crier. Newspapers were a luxury in the 1800s, with city folk who had money being the ones who could afford them. So, if you were in a sleepy frontier town, how did you hear about the goings-on of the world? Through the town crier. These people would go around the streets and shout the latest news. From assassinations to a nearby event, a guy shouting as loud as possible is how many in these times got their news. In a way, your town crier would be like a trusted news YouTuber you'd watch, and may also be just as trustworthy as the YouTuber too. Chinese laundry worker. Have you ever been to a laundromat and wondered why so many are owned by Asian immigrants? This has its roots in the gold rush when Chinese immigrants turned to laundry because they were barred from many jobs. One job that had little language barrier was washing a person's laundry. People would drop off the laundry, they would take care of it, and then give it to the person once it was finished. Of course, this was before the days of washing machines, so they would have to wash them by hand, and they were machines at it. It was a job that wasn't appreciated much. Even if the laundry worker gave the person exactly what they wanted, the person would still call them racial slurs or even skip out on paying. Seems like some things never changed. Buffalo chip gatherer. Do you think picking up after your pet is gross? Try picking up after a buffalo. Buffalo dung, also known as chips, was a great source of fuel, and he who had enough could survive the winter. Some people were paid to gather as much buffalo dung as possible. It wasn't glamorous, but it did pay a reasonable amount. The biggest downside was not just the stink, though. It was how you would be out there for long hours, gathering as much as you could. Like any stinky job, you eventually get used to the job. Professional mourner. This career has had its roots in ancient times. And in the Old West, it was still prominent, as not everyone could travel to your funeral or even know that you were gone, possibly not learning until years after. So, if your funeral was lacking in people, some people who didn't even know you would be paid to mourn. And the louder and better they mourned, the more money they'd get. Usually, this was a woman's job, as men crying wasn't seen as manly back in these times, and women were associated with being more emotional. It helped bring closure to the family, and most of the women who did this job got paid pretty nicely too. Chimney sweeps. With heating and gas fireplaces, houses with chimneys are much rarer nowadays, but back in the Old West days, many homes had chimneys. and these chimneys would get soot buildup over time. A chimney sweep would be there to clean up the buildup to ensure your chimney was running smoothly. Often, they'd clean the chimneys without any respirators or other ways to protect them, so a chimney sweep didn't have a long life. If they were lucky, they might develop a chronic cough. This job was also seen in other places besides the Old West, too. Water witcher. A water witcher, or dowser, was someone who claimed they could find precious groundwater by using a Y-shaped twig and observing its movements. When they felt odd movements, a digging person would go. The results for these efforts were dicey at best, usually. But some people did strike gold. Dowsing is seen as a pseudoscience nowadays, with many claiming that the ones who found water got lucky. But others are still true believers in this profession. But if a water witcher were bad at their job, people would cast them out, sometimes acting like they were witches at Salem in the process. Gong Farmer. Many frontier towns lacked plumbing and instead used cesspits and outhouses to do their business. Have you ever been to a park or event that used an outhouse and hated how gross it was? Now, imagine that was your only option. And what happens when the pit or outhouse gets full? A gong farmer was there to remove the dung. Do we even need to explain why this job was a bad one? It stunk, you didn't get much appreciation for it, and gong farmers often caught diseases in the process. Not just because of the waste, but because there were usually critters in those pits, including bacteria, rats, and other vermin. With plumbing, this job thankfully went away, though someone has to be in charge of cleaning the sewers. Spitoon Cleaner. When you think of a stereotypical Old West bar, the spittoon sitting in the corner may come to mind. With so many people chewing tobacco, they needed some place to spit in, and that's where the spittoon came in handy. But what happens when it is full? There'd be someone to clean out the tobacco spit, cigar ashes, and other unsightly things people would dump in them. It was a dirty job, and not many spittoon cleaners got much thanks for it. Nowadays, any dippers will just use an empty soda bottle as a makeshift spittoon, and usually we do not see as many people dipping these days due to the cancer-causing agents in tobacco. Barber Surgeon. Do you have a barber or a hairstylist you trust with your hair? Probably so. Now, would you trust them to pull your teeth or perform surgery on you? Probably not. But back in the frontier times, barbers doubled as surgeons, dentists, and bloodletters. These barbers were often employed during wartime and would be there when a soldier was injured. They had razors, scissors, and other equipment that wasn't easy to find at the time, so they'd do it all. These people were jacks of all trades, but they were surprisingly good at their job. So yes, even though it might be scary to trust your life in the hands of a guy who cut your hair, many who did came out relatively unscathed. Town photographer. Nowadays, if you want a professional photo of yourself, you have many options, including the phone in your pocket. But back then, those who had cameras would have a monopoly over the town's photography needs. They'd photograph family portraits, take photos of events happening, take crime scene photos, and even take pictures of the dead. And it wasn't an easy profession. Cameras were bulky and, due to their limited technology, could take the photographer minutes, if not hours, to take a single snapshot. It also required developing photos with chemical agents, oftentimes hazardous to breathe in. But these people were important, helping to preserve history and give families photos of their loved ones that would last a lifetime. Shotgun messenger. Have you ever called a shotgun when you and your friends rode in a car together? What does that mean? Back in the frontier times, shotgun messengers were people who would ride in carriers, trains, and other methods of transportation. They were armed with shotguns and ready to protect the cargo at a moment's notice. It was a hazardous job. Your shotgun could scare away bandits, but if it caught the eye of a bandit with a mean shot, you'd be in trouble. And sometimes it wouldn't be humans you thought, but wild wolves or other creatures eager to get a piece of not only the cargo, but you as well. Saloon Hunter. Have you ever been to a restaurant and the food is taking a while to come out? If so, you or one of the members of your party may have said something to the effect of, "Are they killing the cow back there?" Well, in frontier times, someone was in charge of hunting game to be served at the saloon, and that included killing cows. Some saloons served dried meats, beans, and other non-perishables, but the more upscale saloons prided themselves on freshly hunting game. Many times they would be a sharp shot, because time was money, literally, as customers could walk out if they so wished. Being a saloon hunter could pay a lot, but if you had a bad hunt, you may have had angry patrons who wanted you for dinner. Whiskey taster? Have you ever gone to a place that offered free alcohol tastings? Well, in the frontier times, someone's job was to taste the whiskey for quality. That sounds like a dream come true for some. But in these times, there were no quality standards. The whiskey could be poisoned, or there could be contaminants in it that would make the taster sick. There's a reason why some whiskeys in this time had names like coffin varnish. Leech collector. Medicinal leeches became big in the 1800s and are still used to this day. Back then, someone's job was to find leeches, be it in swamps or other places. And often, they'd have to use their own blood to attract the leeches. So imagine coming out of a swamp covered in blood-sucking leeches, and instead of being horrified, you were proud of today's catch. This profession was even bigger in the UK, where medicinal leeches became endangered. Luckily, today's leeches are raised on farms, and you don't need to go out to hunt them. Billiard scorekeeper. In Old West saloons, shooting billiards was a popular pastime and a serious business. Drunk patrons would fight over scores and sometimes be deceptive about how many points they earned. So, some saloons had scorekeepers who needed quick math and to take the lumps from angry drunk patrons who claimed they were lying. Billiards was serious business, and sometimes these referees were the one thing standing between the patrons walking out or shooting up the saloon because of a bad game. Tallow Chandler. Homes did not have electricity, so how did folks keep their houses lit? Through candles that were often made from tallow. We know about tallow being used as an alternative in foods, but yes, it worked in lighting as well. This was much less expensive than using wax, but it came with its own drawbacks. Due to the lack of good food preservation, the tallow could smell rancid. And even if you had some fresh tallow, your candles would give off a beefy smell. Nowadays, candles smell like lavender, fresh linen, and pine, not like rotten meat. Rat catcher. Back in the Old West, rats could spread diseases that could wipe out villages if the problem wasn't taken care of. That's where the rat catcher came in. While vermin control is still a huge profession, they did it differently in the frontier times. They'd use traps and rat poison, but a rat catcher may come with an army of dogs ready to bark when they heard scurrying in the walls. One rat poison, strychnine, was not only used to kill rats, but was also added to whiskey. Turkey drover. When Thanksgiving came, how would you get your turkey? Before trains, or in places where the railway system was non-existent, a turkey drover would bring you turkeys. It was an absurd hassle and posed some logistical issues. Some turkeys, if too close together, would trample on each other. Shooters would prevent this from happening by leading the turkeys with a long pole with red flannel attached to the end. Sometimes these drovers and turkeys would end up traveling for miles, and they would have to do everything they could to keep these birds alive. It was another job that wasn't appreciated enough, as taking care of turkeys isn't as easy as it looks. Knocker up. Before alarms, how could you ensure that you would get up early enough? In some cities, a person was employed to take a long baton and tap on your window, or just loudly knock on your door. This profession was mainly in the UK, but some may have existed in the US. And it could be a dangerous job, as not everyone liked getting woken up. With more reliable alarm clocks, this profession soon went away, and some lives were saved too. Saloon pianist. When you imagine a saloon, you may think of a man playing the piano in the corner. The saloon pianist was a job that set the mood for many saloons, but it was often dangerous. People would attack the poor pianist during bar fights or complain that the pianist wasn't playing their favorite song. And some pianists had no musical talent at all. They just hit random notes, and the drunk patrons didn't mind too much. Sometimes it was easier to keep them happy with simple actions rather than a complex sonata. Ice cutter. Before freezers, how did people keep things cool? One way was by buying ice from an ice cutter. These people would harvest ice that formed in rivers during the winter season and then use tools to cut it. Then it would be stored in an ice house, an insulated building that kept ice cold for months. In some cases, ice houses would have drains to remove any meltwater, which could accelerate the ice melting. Before the fridge, these people were essential to keeping perishables from going bad. In many cases, the ice would keep the perishables safe for weeks, sometimes months, until it was all used up. But they were a profession where people would be angry if you had a poor harvest or a draft in the ice house that melted everything. Dynamite handlers. In the 1860s, dynamite was invented, and it became a handy tool for carving out mines and constructing railroads. But of course, someone had to transport, handle, and light it up. That was where the handlers came in. Most of them would handle a stick, transporting it, or even throwing the stick of dynamite into the area to blow it up. This profession could be fun, but it could spell your doom if you mess it up. Many people were caught in explosions, thought a stick was a dud but wasn't, or accidentally set off their stash of dynamite during transport. And if you got out of that with a few missing fingers, you would be one of the lucky ones. Canary keeper. Ever heard the phrase that something is the canary in the coal mine? This phrase comes from using canaries to spot toxic gas in mines. Canaries were sensitive to this gas and would succumb to it far before humans, meaning that if your canary dies, you need to get out of the mines. Someone had to take care of them, and it could be an emotional job if your canary died. Imagine taking care of a bird for a good while, only for it to suddenly die when you were in the mines. It was time to mourn, but not for too long. You had to get out of there before you joined the canary in the afterlife. Gandhi dancer. As the railroad was being constructed, someone had to lay down the rails. Gandhi dancers are said to have gotten their names from the synchronized work they had to do, and that they moved like geese while doing so. It was honest labor, but tiring. They were the ones who not only laid down the tracks, but ensured their security, and also adjusted the tracks if there were problems. Many times, this job was done all day, with employees leaving at sundown. Come a storm or a heat wave, it could be dangerous, especially if out in the open where lightning could strike, or if you were miles away from water. Gandhi dancers help build modern America, and they need more appreciation. Buffalo bone picker. In the 1800s, bison were hunted nearly to extinction, and some people were in charge of picking up their bones. Bison bone had industrial use, such as being used for fertilizer. Again, there was always the risk for infection when handling these, as many of these buffalo were already decaying. Plus, it smelled pretty bad too. Mine salter. During the gold rush, there were people looking to sell their mines to investors who were looking for gold. But if your mine had no gold, you may pay someone to salt the mines or add gold to the ore. Mine salters were a profession that could get you big bucks if you knew how to sell the mine, and the previous owner was eager to share the wealth. But often, the owners would be dishonest. No surprise there, and because of that, they'd throw you under the bus if the investors found out. Resurrectionist. This was a fancy name for a body snatcher, someone who went to the graves of people to dig them up. Body snatching was commonly done to sell the bodies to science, and to say it was an unethical job would be an understatement. Plus, it was a nasty profession, as digging up a body, even if fresh, isn't the most sanitary thing. But people did it, and they made big bucks off it. If you see some old graves, there's a chance a body snatcher has already dug up the bodies and probably took the body, and a few freebies as well. Traveling dentist. Also known as frontier dentists, these people would travel and help those who needed a tooth pulled or needed dentures. Dentures in these times were made from ivory, gold, or sometimes other people's teeth. Maybe those teeth came from a local resurrectionist, and when you needed your teeth pulled, you didn't get nitrous, but a shot of whiskey. People were made from tougher stuff back then, and it's a miracle they went through those procedures. But it did make sense when the other alternative was dying of tooth decay. Petty bounty hunter. Many people romanticize the bounty hunter as a man who pursues the most dangerous criminals in the West, but many bounty hunters dealt with petty crimes, like chicken thievery or missing a debt payment. And the reward was usually meager for such a dangerous job, because even petty thieves could get violent and pull out a gun if confronted. Phrenologist. In the 1800s, mental health was still an underdeveloped field. Phrenologists were people who claimed they could know someone's personality by feeling a person's head and measuring their bumps. Nowadays, this profession is considered bunk, but back then, people took it seriously. You could be in the doghouse if a phrenologist felt your skull and said you were likely to be a cheater. Camp cook. Also known as a cookie, this was the person in charge of cooking meals for traveling cowboys. Come hell or high water, the cookie was there to make 3 meals a day for hungry cowhands who could be as picky as they were starving. Cookies lived on the trail and even were chefs at the ranch once the cowhands made their delivery. Even if the meal was simply beans and bread, the cookie was a vital part to keep America moving. Compositor. Finally, let's look at how the newspaper was made. A compositor would have to choose an individual letter and use a typestick to create a line in today's paper to prepare it for the printing press. The job kept you busy, as news is always happening, but it was dangerous. Why would something like this be dangerous? This job had lots of lead, which was used to make the sticks, so many compositors died from lead poisoning, telling the news. These 33 jobs are mostly obsolete in today's world, showing that technology and changing needs can turn a steady career into a non-existent one. You don't hear too many people working as an ice cutter, mine salter, or even camp cook. But back in the Old West, these jobs built America. And while today's job system is far from perfect, it was far worse back then. You could get paid pennies for a job that could end your life at a moment's notice. From getting into the dangerous coal mines to fighting off bandits, you never knew when a day at work would be your last. What are some other Old West jobs we didn't mention that you find fascinating? Better yet, if you lived in the Old West, which of these jobs do you think you'd be good at? Would your stomach be strong enough to be a whiskey taster, or do you have the luck to find water with a dowsing rod? Let us know in the comments. And as usual, like, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications if you want to see the latest frontier mysteries.